Take my name if you must, sir, but not her cloak," Eleanor Ravenscroft said, and closed both hands around the constable's wrist. The old woman in the mud clutched Eleanor's shawl, while the crowd drew back from them, as if kindness itself were catching. 3 paces away, a dark-haired gentleman in a black carriage coat watched without moving. No one in the Warwickshire High Street knew yet that the woman Eleanor shielded was his mother. Behind him, Lady Beatrice Whitfield smiled, as though Eleanor's kindness had just become useful evidence. The morning was cold for early autumn. Rainwater shone between the cobblestones. Eleanor knelt directly in the wet street, one arm around the trembling woman in the patched brown cloak. The fashionable ladies of the St. Jude's Charity Committee had already turned their backs. They had called the woman a drunken beggar. They had said she was not worth touching, but Eleanor had seen the blood on the old woman's stocking and the frail angle of her shoulders. So she had taken out her own self-bound blue primer, a little book of hand-copied alphabet lessons, and slipped it beneath the woman's knee to keep the stones from cutting deeper. A schoolmistress to the gutters, someone laughed from the tavern steps. Eleanor kept her pleasant smile in place. It was her best shield. If she smiled, no one could see how much the laughter burned. If she made herself useful, perhaps they would forget the word that always followed her. Thief. The companion who had stolen a pearl mourning brooch. It had never been proved. A stained name required no proof. The constable jerked his arm, trying to free himself. "Let her go, Miss Ravenscroft. You have enough trouble to your name." Eleanor tightened her shawl around the old woman. As she did, the woman's coarse sleeve slipped back. Beneath the dirt, Eleanor saw a fine leather glove lined with purple silk. Something pale glimmered inside it, hidden by the curled fingers. Why would a beggar carry a glove stamped with the crest of Stonehaven? Before she could look closer, the constable pulled harder. "Her name is not the matter at hand," a man's voice said. The crowd fell silent. Alexander Ashbourne, Duke of Stonehaven, stepped into the street. He did not look first at Lady Beatrice, though she was busy arranging her expression into concern. He did not look at the constable. He looked at Eleanor's bare hands, reddened from gripping the man's rough sleeve. Then his gaze dropped to the blue primer pressed into the mud beneath the old woman's knee. The Duke of Stonehaven was known throughout the county for warmth. He funded schools, spoke kindly to footmen, remembered tenants' children by name, and made every person in a room feel attended to. But now his warmth had drawn inward. It had become something grave and still. "Why defend a stranger who has no name worth protecting?" he asked. Eleanor looked up at him and offered the same bright, careful smile that had carried her through a year of whispers. "Because repayment would spoil the act, Your Grace." Alexander went utterly still. It was not a rebuke, but he received it like one. The old woman swayed. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed against Eleanor's shoulder. The crowd gasped and stepped farther away, as if poverty might stain their hems. Alexander did not call for a servant. He came forward at once, went past the constable, and lifted the frail woman into his arms with a tenderness that made Eleanor's breath catch. Dukes did not touch beggars. Dukes tossed coins from carriages and let others do the bending. Alexander carried the woman to his carriage himself. Eleanor followed, her skirts heavy with mud. He settled the unconscious woman on the velvet seat and brushed a lock of grey hair from her brow. "Mother," he whispered. The carriage door closed. Eleanor stood frozen on the pavement. The hand she had warmed in the mud belonged to the Dowager Duchess of Stonehaven. She had not helped a beggar. She had placed herself in the centre of the most powerful family in Warwickshire. Behind her, Lady Beatrice's voice rang out, bright and false.
"Oh, the poor dear! Had I known she was ill, I would have sent my own carriage. One must be so careful of disease."
Eleanor did not turn. Her blue primer was gone, taken into the carriage beneath the dowager's arm. Her shawl was gone too, and Eleanor knew with a sinking certainty that her quiet life above the bakery was over. The hand she had warmed in the mud would open doors. Or it would ruin her completely. By evening, every tea table in the county had a new story. The Dowager Duchess had walked the streets in rags, and the brooch thief had saved her. Eleanor sat in her narrow room above the bakery, mending the hem of her only good day dress. She smiled as she drew the needle through the cloth, though no one was there to see it. Habit was a stubborn thing. If she looked cheerful, even alone, the tightness in her chest felt less like fear. A heavy knock sounded at the street door. Moments later, the baker's wife climbed the stairs and handed Eleanor a thick envelope sealed with purple wax. "Miss Ravenscroft is requested at Stonehaven House at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to retrieve her property." It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Eleanor slept very little. She spent the night preparing her defences. She expected a purse of coins to buy her silence. She expected polite dismissal. She expected to be reminded that a woman with a ruined reputation was dangerous near a duke's charity. By morning, she had decided on 3 things. She would not accept money. She would ask for her primer. She would leave before anyone could see how badly she wished to stay somewhere safe. Stonehaven House was grand enough to make silence feel expensive. Footmen moved through the bright hall with quiet purpose. Eleanor kept her chin lifted and both hands folded over her cloth reticule. The butler did not lead her to the formal drawing room. He took her to a sunlit morning room at the back of the house. Alexander stood beside a wooden crate of books out of his coat, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Dust marked one cuff. He looked up, wiped his hands on a handkerchief, and smiled with such open warmth that Eleanor nearly forgot her curtsy. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said, "forgive the disorder. We are attempting to prepare donations for the new reading room, and my librarian has abandoned me for London." Eleanor curtsied. Her smile slipped into place. "Your Grace, I only came for my book." Behind a painted silk screen, a rasping voice said, "She came because I sent for her, Alexander. Stop hovering over the girl." The Dowager Duchess sat in a winged chair wrapped in cashmere. She was pale, but her eyes were very much awake. Eleanor's blue primer lay on the table beside her. "Come here," the Dowager commanded. Eleanor obeyed. "You did not know who I was," the older woman said. "No, Your Grace." "Why did you put your book in the mud?" "Your stocking was torn," Eleanor said. "The stones were sharp." The Dowager studied her. "Beatrice Whitfield told my son this morning that you staged the whole affair. She says you recognized me and threw yourself into the street to win a patron." Eleanor's fingers tightened on her reticule. Her smile did not move. Of course. Kindness could never be kindness when it came from her. It had to be a scheme. "Lady Beatrice is very observant," Eleanor said. "But I assure you, Your Grace, had I known you were a duchess, I would have used a cleaner shawl." Alexander laughed. The sound filled the room before he could stop it. The Dowager's mouth twitched. She tapped the primer. "I opened this. Alphabet lessons, simple sums, all copied by hand. Why do you have it?" Eleanor hesitated. To speak of her work was to invite mockery, but the Dowager's gaze did not permit cowardice.
I teach parish girls when their mothers can spare them, the ones who cannot pay for the village school. I once catalogued my late employer's library, so I made a small system for letters and sums. Alexander stepped around the screen. He was no longer looking at her as a scandal. He was looking at her as if she were the answer to a problem. A catalogue system? Yes, Your Grace. I am funding a public reading room for the village, he said. The charity committee has given me speeches, ribbons, and a great deal of tea. No one has organised the books. Would you accept a temporary post here, to catalogue the donations and prepare the shelves before the opening?
Eleanor stared at him.
Your Grace, surely you know my name. No respectable house will hire me.
I am not hiring your name. I am hiring your hands and your mind. Alexander picked up a sheet of paper from his desk. 10 shillings a week, paid for work, not silence. He left the contract on the edge of the desk instead of pressing it into her hand. The space mattered. Eleanor looked at the paper. She wanted to weep. Instead, she gave him the brightest smile she possessed. I require a great deal of ink, Your Grace. If you can provide it, I will organise your library. Alexander's eyes warmed. Then we begin tomorrow. Eleanor took the contract. She had expected to be paid to disappear. Instead, he had given her a reason to remain. But she understood the rules of the world. A duke's kindness was a public fire. It warmed everyone. She must not imagine it burned only for her. By her third day at Stonehaven House, Eleanor had discovered that the Duke of Stonehaven was a profoundly difficult man. He was far too present. The future reading room was a long, airy chamber on the ground floor, crowded with crates and loose stacks of donated volumes. Eleanor pinned up her sleeves, tied an apron over her plain grey dress, and worked from morning until the housekeeper sent tea. Alexander came daily, not to inspect, to work. He carried the heaviest crates himself. He fetched ink without ringing. When a stack of encyclopedias leaned dangerously, he caught it against his chest and laughed as dust covered his dark waistcoat. You have put the Latin texts with the agricultural manuals, Your Grace, Eleanor said. Alexander looked at the pile. Have I? I thought Cicero might improve the turnips. Only if the turnips are running for Parliament? His grin flashed. I defer to your expertise, Miss Ravenscroft. It was dangerous how easily he made a room feel less cold. Eleanor watched him stop in the corridor to ask a housemaid after her mother's cough. She saw him listen patiently, while old Mr. Horatio Pelham, his solicitor, spoke at length about leases. Alexander gave people his whole attention. He made them feel necessary. Eleanor kept her shield high. She smiled when he entered. She smiled when he left. She made herself perfectly useful. If she was useful, he would not regret hiring her. If she smiled, he would not ask why she copied lessons by candlelight long after her eyes ached. But the outside world did not stay outside. On Thursday, the ladies of the Charity Subscription Committee arrived to tour the unfinished room. Lady Beatrice Whitfield led them in her silk skirts, whispering over the floorboards. Eleanor stepped back toward the tall shelves, her blue primer clasped behind her. How beautifully it progresses, Your Grace, Beatrice said, unfurling her fan. Her gaze found Eleanor at once. Though I see you have employed unusual help. Do be careful with the finer bindings. Things vanish so easily when one is charitable. A few ladies tittered. The old word moved through the room without needing to be spoken. Thief. Eleanor lifted her chin. Her smile stayed still and pleasant. She would not lower her eyes. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing the wound. Alexander's easy expression vanished. He did not shout. He did not make a scene. He simply stepped between Beatrice and Eleanor, placing his body in the path of the insult. "The bindings are quite safe." "Lady Beatrice," he said. His voice remained courteous, but every soft edge had left it. "Miss Ravenscroft's catalogue is so precise that I would know if a single page went missing. She is the reason this room will open at all." Beatrice's fan paused.
Of course, Your Grace. You are very generous.
When the committee swept out, the room seemed to breathe again. Eleanor unclasped her hands. They trembled so, she reached for her pen before he could notice. She expected pity. She expected questions about the brooch. Alexander gave her neither. Instead, he crossed to her heavy oak work table, gripped both edges, and dragged it 3 feet across the floor until it stood in the full light of the bay window. Sun spilled over her catalogue cards. "The light is better here," he said quietly. "You will ruin your eyes in the corner." Eleanor stared at the table. He had not asked her to prove her innocence. He had not demanded that she bear the ugliest part of her life for his judgment. He had simply moved the room so she would never have to work in the shadows.
"Thank you,"
she whispered. It was the first time her voice had cracked in his presence. Alexander's hand remained on the table. For one breath, his public warmth narrowed into something private, something meant only for her. "You do not have to smile when they speak," so he said. Eleanor swallowed and put the smile back where it belonged. "If I do not smile, Your Grace, they win." He did not argue. He only looked at her as if he could see the cost. And that was the danger. Rain came hard the following Tuesday and trapped a damp chill in the stone walls. Eleanor stayed late in the reading room to finish the B section. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, had left a maid drowsing in the passage with a basket of mending, so no one could say Miss Ravenscroft had been hidden alone in a duke's house. That was another rule Eleanor had learned. Innocence required witnesses. She carried the master ledger toward the back office. The door stood ajar. Alexander sat at the mahogany desk. The fire had sunk low. He was not reading estate papers or charity accounts. He was holding a torn brown leather glove. The glove from the street. Its purple silk lining was still stained with mud. All the easy life had gone out of him. He looked emptied by a grief he had not allowed anyone else to see. Eleanor should have stepped away. Instead, she knocked softly on the open door. "Your Grace." Alexander startled. His hand closed over the glove. He looked up, and she saw him try to assemble his usual bright composure. It failed halfway. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said. "You are working late? I came to return the ledger." She set it on a chair, careful not to look directly at the glove. "Are you unwell?" He gave a dry laugh and opened his hand. "My mother wore this because she did not trust my charity committee. She wanted to see who was turned away at the church gates when my name was not present." "She is wise," Eleanor said. "She nearly died on the cobblestones while my committee ladies drank tea." Bitterness roughened his voice. "I built the schools. I fund the almshouses. I give them my time, my name, my money. My father ruled this county with ice. I swore I would rule it with open doors." He stood and crossed to the rain-dark window. "But I did not see her fall," he said. "I did not see the cruelty in front of my own house. I have been so busy being good to everyone that I failed the person who needed me most." Eleanor looked at his reflection in the glass. There he was. Not the smiling duke everyone adored. Not the generous patron with ready hands and ready coin. A man who feared that love had to be earned, daily, publicly, perfectly.
You are afraid,
Eleanor said. He turned. Of what? She stepped closer, leaving the safe edge of formality behind.
that if you stop being useful, people will stop keeping you.
The rain struck the window. Alexander stared at her, as though she had spoken his secret aloud in church. No one must have said such a thing to him before. No one, perhaps, had dared. He took one slow step toward her. And what of you, Eleanor? Her name in his voice shook something loose. Why do you smile when they call you a thief? He asked. Why bind books for children who cannot pay you? Why make yourself necessary to every person who will take your hands and never ask if they ache? Eleanor tried to summon the smile. For once, she could not find it.
Because if I am useful enough, she whispered, perhaps they will forget. Perhaps I will not be the stain in the room. Perhaps I will not become a burden no one defends.
Alexander's face softened with such painful understanding that Eleanor had to look away. He raised his hand. His knuckles brushed her cheek so lightly that the touch might have been imagined. You are not a burden, he said. You never were. For one dangerous moment, Eleanor wanted to lean into him. She wanted to rest. That was why she stepped back. If she needed him, she would not survive the day he discovered the cost of defending her. A sharp knock sounded. Mr. Pelham stood in the doorway, damp hat in hand and a crumpled proof sheet between his fingers. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, the solicitor said. A printer's boy brought this. Montague's lamps have been burning since dusk, by the boy's account. He means to have the press running through the night and the sheets in every coffee room before breakfast. Alexander took the sheet. As he read, the warmth left his face. Not vanished forever. Gathered. Guarded. What is it? Eleanor asked. He handed it to her. The headline was bold and black. The Charity of a Thief. How to Steal a Duke's Favour. Eleanor read until the letters blurred. The pamphlet claimed she had recognized the Dowager Duchess and staged the rescue. It claimed she had used pity to gain a place in Stonehaven House. Worst of all, it claimed valuable books purchased for the reading room had gone missing since her arrival. The old accusation had been tied to a new crime. Will His Grace open a library? The pamphlet asked, only to find his librarian has already sold the pages. The paper slipped from Eleanor's hand. The room that had begun to feel like shelter had become a trap. The next morning, Lady Beatrice Whitfield's carriage stopped outside the bakery. Eleanor was summoned down to the street. She stood on the wet pavement in her thin shawl, while Beatrice looked down from velvet cushions. Geoffrey Montague, the society writer who owned the village press, sat beside her with a bored expression. Miss Ravenscroft, Beatrice said, you look tired. Deception is wearying work. There has been no deception, my lady. The county will think otherwise. Beatrice tapped her fan against the carriage door. The pamphlet will be handed out at the opening unless you leave Warwickshire tonight. Eleanor's heart struck hard against her ribs. You want me to run? I want to protect the Duke's name. He is a good man, easily moved by a tragic face. Beatrice leaned closer. Stand beside him tomorrow, and they will laugh at his charity. They will call him a fool. Leave quietly, and the pamphlet disappears. Stay, and I will see that no respectable house in England admits you again. The carriage rolled away. Eleanor stood in the cold until the baker's wife opened the door and whispered her name. The trap was perfect. If she fled, she admitted guilt. If she stayed, She risked Alexander's life's work. At Stonehaven House, she found him in the reading room, with riding boots on and his coat over one arm. "I'm going to the printer," he said at once. "I will purchase the entire run. Pelham will issue a notice. Montague will answer for every word." "No." Alexander stopped. "Eleanor, these are lies. If you silence them with your title, they will say the pamphlet was true." She walked toward him, refusing to let her voice shake. "They will say I blinded you. They will say you protected your favorite. I do not care what they say of me. I do." The words came out sharper than she intended. She lowered her voice. "This room is not yours alone. It belongs to the children who have never been allowed past a locked shelf. If your charity falls because of me, Beatrice wins twice." His jaw tightened. He wanted to act. She could see the struggle in him. The ache to stand between her and every stone the county might throw. But he looked at her long enough to understand. She was not asking him to abandon her. She was asking him not to take her battle from her hands. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "Open the doors tomorrow. Let them read their poison. Let them accuse me where everyone can hear. They will tear you apart. Then let them try." Eleanor touched the blue primer on her desk. "I have spent a year running from whispers. I will not run from a shout." Alexander looked at her with something deeper than admiration. Respect. "I will open the doors," he said, "but I will stand beside you. That is all I ask." Eleanor did not sleep that night. She sat at the long oak table with one candle, the master ledger, her catalogue cards, and the purchase receipts Mr. Pelham had placed in her care. Mrs. Vale brought tea at midnight and said nothing when Eleanor did not drink it. At 3 in the morning, the columns aligned. The charity committee had requested funds for 200 leather-bound volumes. Alexander had paid for 200. Only 50 had reached the reading room. The missing crates had not vanished after Eleanor arrived. They had been signed for by Lady Beatrice a month before. Then they had been moved by an unmarked carrier's cart to Geoffrey Montague's printing shop for binding repairs. From there, a second receipt showed shipment to a bookseller in Bath. Eleanor sat back. The accusation had not been invented out of spite alone. It had been built to hide theft. Beatrice had tried to cover her trail with a hired cart, a false note of repair, and Montague's name between hers and the sale. But paper remembered what people hoped servants would forget. Eleanor closed the ledger. She did not cry. She felt calm. A cold, clear calm that did not need a smile. She picked up the blue primer. She was ready. The Stonehaven reading room shone in the morning light. Tall arched windows poured sun across polished oak tables. Shelves lined the walls, each book ordered by Eleanor's hand. Servant girls, stable boys, parish children, tenants, tradesmen, and county ladies crowded together in one room, though the ladies had placed themselves well apart. They had not come for books. They had come for blood. Lady Beatrice sat in the front row in lavender silk. Geoffrey Montague stood near the side aisle with a stack of fresh pamphlets under one arm. Eleanor stood near the front desk in her plain grey dress. Her hair was pinned tightly. Her blue primer rested in her left hand. Alexander faced the room in formal black. He looked every inch a duke. But when his gaze met Eleanor's, there was no command in it. Only steadiness. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying to the back. "Today we open a room that should have existed long before now. But before the ribbon is cut, a charge has been brought against Miss Ravenscroft. I will not have any person condemned in whispers beneath my roof. A murmur moved through the crowd. Montague stepped forward with theatrical sorrow. Your Grace, it pains the committee to speak on so joyful an occasion, but we have evidence that the woman entrusted with this room is a known thief. He lifted the pamphlets. Miss Ravenscroft staged her rescue of the Dowager Duchess to gain your favor. Since then, books purchased with charitable funds have vanished. We ask that she be removed at once. Whispers rose. Eleanor felt them touch her skin like cold fingers. Alexander turned to the footman at the rear. Close the doors. The oak doors shut with a heavy sound. The room quieted. If a woman's character is to be attacked in my house, Alexander said, it will be done to her face, and she will answer for herself. Then he stepped back. He did not draw Eleanor behind him. He gave her the floor. Eleanor walked to the center of the room. She did not smile. Mr. Montague claims I stole books, she said. Her voice sounded calm even to herself. This is the master ledger. Every volume that entered this room has a catalogue card written in my hand. She placed the ledger on the front table. The thud made Beatrice's fan twitch. 150 volumes are missing, Eleanor continued. But they did not go missing from this room. She held up the first paper. This is the bookseller's delivery manifest. 200 volumes arrived in Warwickshire 1 month ago. They were signed for by Lady Beatrice Whitfield, acting for the charity committee. Beatrice rose halfway. Naturally, the committee received the crates before they were not delivered here. Eleanor held up the second paper. 2 days later, those crates were moved by an unmarked carrier's cart to Mr. Montague's printing shop for binding repairs. Montague's face tightened. A common arrangement. And this, Eleanor said, lifting the third sheet, is the Bath bookseller's receipt for 150 volumes sold from that shop the following week. The room went still. Beatrice's smile hardened. Forgery. No, said Mr. Pelham from the side of the room. The old solicitor stepped forward. I have examined the marks, seals, and accounts. They are genuine. Eleanor turned back to Beatrice. You were careful, my lady. You used no family carriage. You let Mr. Montague's shop stand between your name and the sale. But the first signature is yours, and the carrier entered the number of crates before he was told to write repairs beside them. Montague backed a step toward the door. Beatrice pointed at Eleanor. The word of a disgraced companion against mine. She is clever, I grant you. Clever enough to throw herself into the mud before a duchess and play saint. Eleanor turned toward the back of the room, where the parish children huddled together. She knelt before a little girl in a faded pinafore and held out the blue primer. Mary, she said gently, will you read the first page? The child's hands shook as she took the book. She looked at the lords, the ladies, the footman, and the closed doors. Then she looked at Eleanor and found courage. A is for apple, Mary read. Her small voice trembled, then steadied. B is for brave. C is for charity. Eleanor stood. I made that book from discarded sermon pages, because this committee would not spare even scraps of its budget for girls like Mary. I do not steal books. I build them. Silence spread across the room. Then Beatrice laughed, once sharp and ugly. This is sentiment, not proof. The woman is a fortune hunter. She saved a beggar because she thought a duke might be watching. It was no performance, Beatrice. The voice came from the back. The crowd parted. The Dowager Duchess of Stonehaven walked forward, in black silk diamonds at her throat, her silver-tipped cane striking the floor. She moved slowly, but no one mistook her strength. She stopped before Beatrice. "I was the beggar in the mud," the Dowager said. Swept through the room. Beatrice turned white. "I walked the street in rags because I wanted to see what our charity became when rank was absent." The Dowager's eyes moved over the committee. "I fell. I bled. You called me a drunkard and stepped over me." No one moved. "This young woman ruined her only good shawl to keep cold from my bones. She defended me when she thought I had nothing to give her." The Dowager lifted her cane slightly toward Eleanor. Her kindness was real, because she believed no rank was watching. Your cruelty was real, because you believed no rank could catch you. The words struck harder than any gavel. Whispers began again, but now they moved away from Eleanor. They gathered around Beatrice and Montague. Alexander stepped forward. "Lady Beatrice Whitfield is removed from the Charity Committee," he said. "Mr. Montague, you will print a full retraction by tomorrow morning, at your own cost. Mr. Pelham will see to the recovery of the stolen funds." Montague's mouth opened. Alexander's voice sharpened. Not cold, but clear enough to cut. "Do not test my patience in front of the children you helped rob." Montague shut his mouth. The footman escorted them out. For one breath, no one spoke. Then Mary began to clap. A stable boy joined her, then a housemaid, then the tenants, then the whole room filled with applause. Eleanor stood at the center of it, the blue primer pressed to her chest. For a year, she had imagined vindication would feel like triumph. It felt quieter than that. It felt like putting down a weight. Alexander came to her, not too close, not claiming what she had won. He bowed his head. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said, and the room quieted to hear him. "I would be honored if you accepted the permanent position of librarian and keeper of the Stonehaven reading room." Eleanor looked at the children. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the women who had once refused to meet her eyes, and now could not look away. "I accept, Your Grace," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "The poor may enter by need, not by recommendation." Alexander smiled. This time, his warmth did not feel spread thin across the world. It felt rooted. "It is done." Autumn deepened into winter. The reading room thrived. A fire burned in the grate from morning until dusk. Servant girls came on their half-days. Stable boys sounded out shipping notices. Parish children leaned over slates until their tongues appeared at the corners of their mouths in fierce concentration. Eleanor no longer smiled to hide exhaustion. Sometimes she smiled because little Mary had read a whole page without help. Sometimes because Alexander arrived carrying books badly tied with string and ink on his cuff. Sometimes because the word thief had begun to fade from the village air, replaced by another. Teacher. One snowy afternoon after the children had gone home, Alexander entered the reading room with his hair wind-blown and his coat dusted white. Mrs. Vale remained in the adjoining office with the accounts close enough to satisfy every rule and kind enough to keep her eyes on the page. Alexander set a stack of worn books on Eleanor's desk. "Donations from London," he said. "I will catalogue them tomorrow." "I brought something else." From inside his coat, he drew out Eleanor's blue primer. Beneath it lay a folded piece of grey wool. Her shawl. It had been cleaned, pressed, and carefully mended. Eleanor touched the hem. There, stitched in tiny purple thread, was the Stonehaven crest. Not payment. Belonging. "My mother wanted you to have it back," Alexander said. Eleanor traced the stitching with one finger. "She is kind. She is also relentless." His mouth softened. Before she went into the village that day, she carried a pearl mourning brooch inside her glove. The very brooch you were accused of stealing. Eleanor's hand stilled. Alexander's voice lowered. She had found it in a Bath pawnbroker's shop. The entry book named the seller as Lady Beatrice's maid. My mother carried it to confront Beatrice privately after testing the committee's charity. Beatrice saw enough to know the truth was near. That is why she tried to destroy you first. The last shadow of the old accusation lifted. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. She had imagined freedom would arrive with applause. Instead, it came here, in a quiet room with snow at the windows and a mended shawl beneath her hands. Alexander reached for her fingers. He did not pull. He only offered his hand. She gave him hers. "There is a Christmas assembly tomorrow night," he said. "I would ask you to walk beside me." "As your librarian?" she asked softly. Alexander looked down at their joined hands. For the first time since she had known him, the man who could speak warmly to an entire county seemed to lose his words before one woman. He drew a breath, then looked back at her. "As the woman who taught Stonehaven what charity means." His thumb brushed once over her knuckles. "And as the woman I love." Eleanor looked at him. He was not asking as a duke choosing downward. He was not rescuing a ruined woman. He was standing before her as a man who had learned that love was not earned by being useful to everyone. It was kept by being true. She closed her hand around his. "I would love to walk beside you, Alexander." He bent and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. A promise, not a claim. Then he stepped back and left the blue primer in her hands. Eleanor walked to the nearest shelf. She placed the little self-bound book at the beginning, the first volume of the Stonehaven Library. A moment later, Mary pushed open the door, cheeks pink from the cold. "I forgot my slate, Miss Ravenscroft." Eleanor smiled and took the blue primer back down. "Then read one word before you go." Mary opened the first page. Alexander stood beside Eleanor, his arm just brushing hers. The little girl looked at the letters, and the first word she read was home.